I'd like to hand over to Mayor Svante Myrick from Ithaca, New York. Welcome, Svante, and happy to hand over the floor to you.
Thank you so much, Laurent. And thank you everybody for being here. I am very sorry that I can't be there in person, that we all can't be there in person. I am coming to you live this morning at 7 a.m. here in Washington, D.C., where I am for the inauguration of our new president. I don't know when I'm going to stop smiling when I say that, but for now, I'm here for the inauguration of the new president, and we are thrilled about that. I want to, if I could, I know that we're going to have the chance for an interactive Q&A, so I want to leave as much time for that as possible, because it occurs to me this morning that it is going to be tough to put this in context, to bring us all back to where we were 1 year ago. But I want to, if I could, try and paint a picture of what we've done in Ithaca and the success that we've had. And I say we because we have had, unfortunately, we've lost 21 of our residents in our community of 100,000 people. Terribly tragic losses, and unfortunately, very small in proportion to what's happened in the rest of the country. Our positivity rate has remained lower than the rest of the country. We have been testing on average at 30 times the rate per person than the rest of the country. And there are a few reasons for that. It is Cornell University, which is here in Ithaca, New York, has been a great partner in helping us squash the pandemic. The Tompkins County Health Department, led by Frank Krupa, and the county administration, Jason Molino, Amy Hendricks, have done a wonderful job. The people of Ithaca have done a great job in maintaining social distance and wearing masks. And Switzerland itself, in 2014, the first time I ever visited Switzerland, I attended a panel and then a workshop being led in part by a gentleman from Swiss Re, the reinsurance company, who walked us through what would be the largest possible challenge. For a reinsurance company, they're not worried about a car accident. They're not even worried about 10,000 car accidents. For them, they're worried about the big global calamities, the threats. And I remember he asked me, he said, what do you think it is that keeps me up at night? And I said, well, maybe it's climate change. Maybe it's social unrest. Maybe it's economic inequality leading to political disruptions. And he said, those are all child's play compared to a global pandemic. And I said, well, why? How could that be? And he said, because a global pandemic is all of those in one and will exacerbate every existing problem in our society while also threatening the life and safety of the people of our planet. And that has turned out to be so true. And the tabletop exercises we went through that week helped prepare me and all of us in Ithaca and Tompkins County for what came. And really what came in a challenge that was threefold. One was how to manage the pandemic itself. That's the first challenge, how to actually keep people healthy and prevent deaths from the pandemic. The second challenge was how to manage the disruptions to our economy and therefore the daily life of people in our city. And then the third challenge, which undergirds the other two, is how to manage the fractures, the civil and societal ruptures that weren't necessarily created by COVID-19, but were certainly widened and exposed. And the technical challenges, I'm sure everybody on this call already knows. We had to go from no masks to masks. We had to, there's a new term called social distancing, which we had to make sure that everybody knew. We had to increase our hospital capacity, turning normal rooms into ICU rooms, ICU meaning intensive care rooms. building ventilator capacity. We had to get our hands on therapeutics and now tests and now vaccines. And all of those challenges, if you're interested, I would be happy to go into in the Q&A. I will just say that one lesson I continue to learn over my life is that I should listen to my mother more, and that we should all probably listen to our mothers more. And December of 2019, she started sending me worried links to news about a new coronavirus. In January, she sent me 3 masks, and I said, "Mom, I can't. What am I going to do with masks?" She said, "You wear the masks." And I'm not going to wear a mask. Do you imagine how strange I'd look, and people would look at me funny if I just wore a mask on the street? Sure enough, we should listen to our mothers because she knew best. And in part, when I began wearing a mask and posting on social media, encouraging people to wear a mask, it was a full month ahead of the New York state guidance, 2 months ahead of the federal guidance, and a full 5 months before the President of the United States started finally setting a good example by wearing masks. Those technical challenges, again, interesting if you're into that stuff. I am very into that stuff, and so I'm happy to talk about it. But I think from the perspective of how we, around the theme of this peace forum, can figure out how to best address the challenges that come next, I think we should focus on those final 2, which is the societal fractures that have been exposed by the COVID pandemic. I mean, and that's really the big one. Because look, and this is different, I know, in every country, but in America, we have existing fault lines around race, around class, and increasingly around political ideology. And those fault lines, just like cracks in pavement, one of the reasons Switzerland is my favorite country in the world, my second favorite country after the United States, is because of the care and I know my Swiss friends would not describe it this way, but this is how I view it: the love that is put into the infrastructure of the country. I am a big infrastructure nut. I have ruined many a cocktail party by talking about sidewalks and streets and bridges, and nobody else is interested, but I'm very interested. And the thing that always fascinates me is I will perceive a crack in a road, a small splintery crack, and it looks like nothing, but I know what's coming. I know that 3 years from now, that crack will be filled with water, and then that water will freeze, and when it freezes, it expands, and the crack grows larger and larger and larger. And those cracks are just like the divisions in our country around race, around class, and around politics. And when times are good, those cracks can seem small and inconsequential, right? They seem like, well, sure, we can tell that the cracks are there, but it's not really a big problem right now. But when you put it under pressure, right? That's what ice does to roads, is it creates pressure. It's what a pandemic does to people, puts them under pressure. Those cracks can explode and erupt. Sure enough, I'm sure you all saw the uprisings and unrest that have been happening in America beginning this summer after the murder of George Floyd, the black man in Minnesota, at the hands of police officers, all the way up to 2 weeks ago here in Washington, D.C., our nation's capital, as a mob attempted to overthrow the United States government by marching to and into the Capitol, some of them with plans to kidnap and assassinate the Vice President of the United States senators, and members of our United States Congress. None of those divisions are new, right? Black people have been treated unfairly by the criminal justice system in America for hundreds of years. Our elections have always been hard fought. We have always called the other side names. But what was it that changed the intensity? What was it that heightened all of the problems? And why was it that mayors in particular were left in the crosshairs to deal with uprisings in the street while also trying to get vaccines and tests and masks out to the population? Well, it's all boils down to a lack of trust. Let me just speak to you from a very personal perspective as a Black American. Things have never in our country worked exactly the way they've been said to work. And that has made us mistrustful. Our nation is very proud of the fact that we are a democracy. We say that we are a democracy and that every person gets to participate. But of course, that wasn't the case from the beginning, right? Black people were not allowed to participate. They were not allowed to vote, even though they did count in the population and counted as parts of districts that elected senators, congressmen, and presidents, but we didn't get to participate. Women didn't have the right to vote until 100 years ago. Black people didn't have the right to vote freely until 50 years ago, just 50 years out of the 250-year history of our country. And even then, as we received the legal right to vote freely, a new regime of penalizing people for criminal offenses by taking away their right to vote was instituted, what we call the new Jim Crow, by arresting people and taking away their right to vote. Now, of course, this does not make sense. I can tell you, as somebody who thinks of criminal offenses, you want to tie the consequence to the action. If we find that you are driving under the influence of alcohol, we take away your driver's license. Okay? Now, if we find that you are using drugs, we take away your right to vote. Why would we do that? It doesn't make any sense. Maybe if you were, if you were voting illegally, we should take away your right to vote. But we've taken away the rights of millions of predominantly Black and brown Americans, their rights to vote. Now, if this continues to happen to you as a people, if you are told one thing, we are about democracy, but another thing happens, which is you are not allowed to participate in that democracy, it can start to build mistrust. The experiments on the Tuskegee experiments, which I don't know if everybody's familiar with, but Black Americans were used as unknowingly to them as test subjects in lab experiments that exposed them to diseases purposefully, is a story that every Black American child knows and has made us very suspicious and fearful of public health measures that are proposed. So when a figure of authority comes out and says, good news, everyone, we have something that is in your interest. We have decided that we are going to ask everybody to wear masks, to stay 6 feet apart. We're asking you to stay home from work. And pretty soon we're going to be putting vaccines into your arms. What you have is a whole lot of people who say, I don't believe you. And with the lack of trust, no good things are possible. With trust, you can achieve almost anything. But without trust, no good things are possible. Which brings me to my final point before I want to open it up for questions, because I recognize that I'm the only live mayor here, and you may have questions for it. But I want to say, without being overly political, that our president, our former president, President Trump, made an enormous leadership mistake, which was, look, and I get this. I've been in public office for the last 14 years. I've been mayor for the last 10 years. And I understand that there's a lot of things that are unfair about being a leader. The most unfair is that you get blamed for everything. Something goes wrong, it's your fault. It is, the economy is going downwards. People are mad at you. There's too much crime. People are mad at you. The housing prices are too expensive. People are mad at you. And if it's raining too hard, then people get mad at you. It is not fair. And what happened with President Trump has happened to almost every leader I know, which is that something bad was happening. This pandemic was happening. And he was afraid that he was going to be blamed for it, right? That what the pandemic was going to do to our health and our economy and our society was going to be bad. And he did not want to be blamed for it. Now, your first reaction when you're put in that place is to minimize, to say, okay, this is not going to be that bad. So nobody get upset, and nobody get upset with me, because this is not going to be that bad. What you have to do as a leader is pivot and say, if this is going to be bad, how do we make the best of it? How do we enlist you, the people, as co-conspirators, instead of somebody to be told, don't worry, don't wear a mask. There's only 3 cases. There's only 15 cases. Now there's only 1,000 cases. We now have had millions of cases and over 400,000 Americans dead. More people than died in the Second World War have died from coronavirus in America last year. He made that pivot too late and too half-heartedly. He did not step up to the reins of leadership to take this seriously. And the problem with that is that the president has a very loyal fan base. I mean, his supporters, he had 75 million votes in this last election. They trust him, they respect him, they listen to him, and they don't listen to people who disagree with him. So by downplaying this virus, he turned something that did not need to be political into a political problem. So conservatives in America began to view the measures we had to take in the pandemic, which was social restrictions, mask wearing, and the closure of some parts of our economy, as personal attacks on the president, and therefore did not participate in them at the rate that we needed. So a big part of, and this is uncomfortable to say because I'm aware that saying it might lead to further division, but you have to do an autopsy if you're going to figure out what went wrong. And truly, I mean this truly, the fact that our city, Ithaca, is known as a very progressive place. It voted overwhelmingly for Hillary Clinton, and this time overwhelmingly for Joe Biden. And I think what that meant is that in our community, we took very seriously the public health advice and followed it. And that's why we've seen far fewer folks contract the virus and pass away from the virus than places that followed the former President Trump so closely. What are the lessons for us as leaders moving forward? It just has to be to remember that good governance is good politics. The only way to cover yourself in glory in the long term is often to look bad and to make people mad in the short term. To say something is going wrong in our community, and you can blame me if you want for the fact that this is going wrong, and you can vote me out of office if you want, but we have to take proactive measures. If we fail to learn that lesson, and then, President Trump is gone now, maybe he runs again, maybe he doesn't. He's gone now. So this is not about scoring points or winning another election. This is about saying that the next calamity, maybe the next pandemic, the next natural disaster, or the slow moving crises that we know are already here, like climate change, we have to be willing to say uncomfortable, hard truths and deliver those truths, whether we're in power or not, if we're going to survive the crises we face. I truly believe that.
Svante, thank you so much for this excellent overview, covering quite some aspects. When at the beginning, I think the third or the fourth sentence, you said you wanted to leave quite some time to Q&A. I thought maybe 2 other items would follow, and then we would be in the Q&A. But you managed to kickstart the topic and to bring in such a width of items. that I'm almost worried we will not be able to get back to all of them with the questions we already got in. But maybe let me start with a first question, which is partly inspired by questions which came in and which I think is of concern to many of us. But you are the mayor, so I'll ask you. I mean, cities are often were seen, I think will still be seen as kind of laboratories of designing new ways of interaction, people of different origins, of different classes, still possibly separated through different parts of the city, but being in a relatively small room, exchanging, experiencing in public transport, in schools, in cultural locations, and so on. And this necessity to have the trust based also on communication and exchanges. And now we have the pandemic, and the pandemic puts into question all these particularities of exchanges and closeness and this lab atmosphere of cities. I mean, cities are now independent of the specific policies which were adopted. I think they're all closed down or slowed down to various degrees. I mean, how do you see the midterm future and also the effects it will have on the population now, on your population? I mean, how will it affect the way you govern? And do you see particular impacts which you will have to cope with in the coming months in this respect?
Yes, for sure. I will say, Lauren, that's a very good question, and I'll make a broader point if that's okay here, which is that I think there's been a lot of concern about the future of cities. You know, when there was so much uncertainty about the virus, how is it spreading? I need to get away from people. Cities are obviously places by definition where people are closer together. That is what a city is. It's a congregation of people. There's much concern about what is the future of cities? Will cities survive this? And I say this as a mayor, so maybe take it with a grain of salt, but I say it also as a student of history, which is that cities are indestructible. Cities will survive this. They will thrive on the other end of this. And they will thrive because what you need to overcome social challenges, social meaning challenges that involve people, is you need people, right? To paraphrase the former President Clinton, there's nothing wrong with cities that can't be fixed by what is right with cities. And there's a reason that the challenges that came before, from cholera to the pandemic of 1917, to even recognitions in wartime that cities are vulnerable. If you live in London and we're being bombed, that if you lived in the countryside, you may not be targeted in the same way. Cities have always bounced back. They are a feature of human civilization going back 50,000 years. And that is because if we are going to, and I keep saying we, because addressing these problems require teams. It requires teams of interactive approaches. Now, we are going to have to make changes, particularly when it comes to airborne viruses. Public transit, trains, buses, airplanes, to have people feel comfortable using them, they'll have to believe that they are clean and safe, which means investing in things like better air filtration systems. Schools were both challenged in that people said, how am I ever going to send my kids to school again? And then any of our parents on the session with us might know, after a few months, and for some of us, after a couple of days, we said, oh, we have to send our kids back to school. We need schools as a necessary part of socialization and our education, and frankly, for the mental health of parents. So I think the future requires cities, that cities will bounce back and recover, that in fact, we will bounce back faster than suburban or rural communities because of the access to education and healthcare and vibrant economies that will be required to recover from COVID-19. But we will have to learn part of that lesson that I said, which is that we'll have to be honest when something's going wrong. We'll have to encourage the people to help us in solving the problem instead of lying to them that there is no problem at all that requires solving. And we'll have to lean into the 3 E's. So I'd like the 3 E's very quickly, my shorthand for how to achieve human behavioral change. The first E is education. The second E is enforcement. And the third is engineering. Education, enforcement, and engineering combined are how you change human behavior. Think about traffic safety. We tell people if you have to drive slower to prevent accidents, that's education. You put up signs, you teach driving courses. Second is enforcement. You have police out there that give tickets for people who are driving too fast or too recklessly. But the third, engineering, actually saves the most lives, which is you put in speed bumps, stop signs, you make narrower roads so people drive more slowly, and you put in seat belts and airbags so that when you crash, there's something there that saves your life. Those engineering improvements have saved far more lives than education or enforcement combined. And the same is going to be true for pandemics. And engineering new solutions, as the Mayor of Freetown was mentioning, giving away free masks. A mask, a beautiful and simple bit of engineering, right? That helps protect people as much, even if you can't explain to them how the virus works through education. And enforcing it, saying we're going to give you a fine, does not do as much as giving away a free mask that you can make for pennies. That's going to be the way forward for cities, is finding engineering solutions to those problems.
Thank you, Svante. Several questions actually fit nicely to this last part of your answer. They treat items linked to centralization, decentralization, federal level, city level. So in a nutshell, I mean, the response by now, which you were able to provide, I mean, how much was it supported, maybe even steered through the federal level? How much was it the city? How much was it even below this level of the city? What was managed through communities, local leaders? Now also thinking about Yvonne Akisoya's presentations. I mean, what would you say? I mean, thinking at these different levels.
Yeah, look, mayors should, and consider the source again when I say this, mayors should be in charge of everything. Just put us in charge of everything. We are, because we're close, look, the big problem is that local governments have too little power and too much responsibility, while our federal governments have too much power and too little responsibility. That is, and when I say responsibility, the response is the part there that's necessary. I go to work, go to church, go to the grocery store, in and among the people that I serve. And when there is a problem, I am forced to respond to it. I don't have, when somebody in the grocery store stops me and says, I'm having trouble with traffic on 3rd Street, can we help fix the traffic? I'm not able to just say, well, I would, but the other political party is being real jerks and we can't do anything about it. People don't want to hear that. They want to hear solutions. They need to see solutions, or else I will be replaced. Meanwhile, the federal government, that is exactly what they do all too often. They blame the other side. They say the reason we can't get this done is the other side, and they're able to get away with it. Now, when you have a problem on this scale, what is required is enormous amounts of testing, vaccination, and monetary support to people and businesses. That did eventually come through from the federal government. This summer, they passed multi-trillion-dollar bills that helped local communities deliver on the work. but it would have come much faster if they'd been listening to their mayors. And it's not just me, it's every mayor in America in both political parties in February, March, and April. So I don't know, maybe it's a leading question, but I would say that yes, local governments act faster. They're often far more flexible, and they're more attuned to the needs on the ground than the federal government is. So I think a rebalancing that gave local authorities more power would lead to better results across the board.
Yes, now I understand why Switzerland is your second most liked country, because what you said about the relation between local and national government is would get the majority in Switzerland without getting more precise. I'd like to bring this comparison between power and responsibility and vice versa, local, federal, to link it to the question of trust, which you also mentioned as essential. So even though, I mean, it was also for the pleasure of making this producing this dichotomy between power and responsibility. I mean, if we look ahead, I mean, having too much responsibility and not enough power, how will this impact on trust? I mean, will people feel sorry, and even more solidarity will emerge at the local level, and mayors will be even more liked, or will it end up being detrimental?
Yeah, it's a very good question, because you have to deliver. I saw one of the questions in the chat, and I'm not able to see them all, but I see some as they pop up. One of the early ones was, why do so many Americans trust President Trump? And that's a question I've wrestled with myself for the last 4 years. And I think a big part of it is that President Trump was able to speak to diagnose much of the societal problems that we have, or that section of the country is facing. Even if he didn't have solutions, he was willing, almost, honestly, he was almost more willing. Sorry, it's getting a little feedback. And I want to say this delicately. I think in part because he was not offering solutions, it was easier for him to talk about the problems than many other traditional politicians. What does that look like in real life? That looks like, what do you do when you go to a factory town that the factory has left? Now, if you have an entire city built around a factory, and that factory has gone away, either because the industry itself has collapsed or has moved to another part of the country or another part of the world. Well, the answer is actually extremely complicated. It means retraining the population that's there. It means building new industries. It means a long, slow, arduous process that can take decades, require a lot of public investment, a lot of private investment. And in the meantime, things will be pretty bad, frankly. There will be high unemployment, high levels of misery. People will begin dying at younger ages. It's a really hard spot to be in. And I say that as somebody who grew up in one of those communities. I watched what it is like to experience deindustrialization in real time. Now, if you're a politician, do you run for office by saying, we can fix this, but it will take 30 years of hard work, and after a 4-year term, we will get hardly anything done? No, you don't want to say that. So what you end up doing is sounding quite mealy-mouthed. I don't know if you'll know this expression, but you end up talking without saying much. You say things like, we're going to get people back to work by building an economy that works for everybody, and calling on the power of the American people and their ingenuity and freedom. And it sounds, frankly, I trust that you'll know this expression, it sounds like bullshit to the people. Now, but it's the truth, but we weren't willing to tell the truth, which is that there is no silver bullet. This is going to take a long time, and things in your community are not going to get better right away. Trump was willing to do what I think a lot of politicians in middle school and high school will do. Which is when you run for class president in your 9th grade, you say, I'll fix it. I'll fix it. You want pizza for lunch every day? Elect me president and we'll have pizza for lunch every day. Right? And what he did in those factory towns is he said, that factory closed. Well, elect me president, I'll open it. Now, most Americans understood that that was unlikely, but at least he was saying what they wanted to hear, right? They wanted nothing more than those factories to reopen. They knew it was a long shot, but they said to themselves, this guy's going to be president. And he stood on that stage and he promised us that that factory was going to reopen. He didn't say, we're going to help rebuild our economy by calling on the ingenuity of the American people. He said, no, that factory is going to open. He pointed right at it and he promised us. And so I'm going to go with the person that at least is saying what I want to hear instead of somebody who's saying something I can't understand at all. That honestly has fractured the trust even more because 4 years later, guess what? The factories did not reopen. The coal industry, which was a huge part of President Trump's push, he's going to reopen the coal industry, has fewer jobs now than when he took office. Why? Because it's complicated, right? It's very complicated. And what does that mean? It means that people who were already mistrustful 4 years ago, who believed that President Trump was going to fix it, or at least hoped that he would, are even less trustful now. I think the way forward has got to be one of honesty. I think we have to have elected officials running and saying, problems are complicated. The pandemic is complicated. And I'm not promising you that I can fix it, but I promise you that you will be able to watch me try and that I will show my work every step of the way. And that when I'm lost, I'll tell you. And when I'm out of ideas, I'll ask for your ideas. And we're going to get through this together. And we've got to have elected officials who are willing to be vulnerable in that way. And I think that's actually a big part of why, President Joe Biden, who I've been a fan of for a very long time, but he is not known as a gifted orator. And he did not crisscross the country saying, I'm going to fix every problem. He really campaigned from a place of vulnerability and of honesty. He's somebody who's experienced personal tragedy. So he's able to speak to the many, many families who've experienced personal tragedy this year and say, I know what this feels like. I think the federal government could be doing a good job, but I don't have a magic wand that will make the virus go away on January 21st today. All I can promise you instead is that I'm going to try and work with you, and that won 81 million votes. So I think if we can follow that path, we can help rebuild trust.
So if we now move from this more general issue to the very concrete level, looking at specific measures in the fight against the pandemic, also measures to reach out to homeless people, measures to reach out to elderly people. Do you have one or the other examples, or maybe not yet implemented examples, but ideas of what you're striving for, what you see as a promising next tasks?
Sure. Yeah, we found there's an expression, especially when you're working with the poor. And so my family, I mentioned a little bit about the situation I grew up in. I was actually homeless for the first 6 months of my life. And for the first 8 years of my life, my family was in and out of homelessness and living really in desperate poverty right up until I was 18 and went off to Ithaca to Cornell University. And when you're working with a population that does not have resources, you have to, and this is the expression, meet people where they are. And usually this is a term of art that means let's, go out of, if you can't bring Muhammad to the mountain, bring the mountain to Muhammad, right? It's like if people don't trust the vaccines, you have to go out of your way to demonstrate that the vaccines are safe by having your elected officials get vaccinated in public. But what it actually means is that physically you have to meet people where they are. What we did is we set up one testing site in our county, one place where people could get tested, and recognized immediately that the poor people couldn't physically get there. They didn't have cars. They didn't have reliable transportation to get to that site. So what do? Well, you build more testing facilities and you put them in places where the poor live, and you send money, as our local government did, to homeless providers, service providers, and volunteers so that they could go into homeless encampments. We didn't ask the homeless folks to come into a testing facility. We brought the tests into the fields to them so that people who were sleeping outside were able to get tested. We were able to deliver masks, and we're doing the same thing for our vaccine distribution. The same with elderly people, especially people who are living inside facilities. We didn't want them to leave those facilities to have to come to another place. So we have to bring the services to them. And that lens, you would call that an equity frame, right? Which says, well, if you have one site and you put it in the center of the community, then everybody can access it equally. It's equidistant from everybody, so it's fair. It's not fair. It's not equity. Sorry, is that on my end?
Or a driver of conflict. However, it can also contribute to peace.
I don't know if that's on my end. It might be. Hold on.
A key element in the prevention and resolution of conflict.
Oh yeah, sorry. That was the forum I had in the background. So dealing with marginalized populations means bringing the solution to the people and not relying on the people to come to you.
Thank you, Mayor Myrick. I'd like still to get back to one point which was mentioned by Yvonne Akintoyer. I know it wasn't your presentation, it was hers, but still, she said that actually the most important thing for a mayor is to win the heart of the people. So this has, of course, a very romantic dimension. But listening to her, I had the impression, well, given the situation, particularly also regarding infrastructure in Freetown. I mean, you seem to be a real fan of infrastructure, and it was very interesting to listen to your statements in this regard. I mean, Freetown, I've personally never been to Freetown, but I think it's still quite a different situation than the city of Ithaca. So there, it may be not only a measure of last resort, but it may be essential to work through the heart of the people. Would you say that in another way it also applies to Ithaca, or is it more a saying in your case?
Yeah, it's a good question. Let me just say a bit about what my experience of Switzerland, actually, which might help explain my philosophy. Do you know, Lauren, do you know this concept, love languages? It's become very popular in America.
No, I don't, sorry. Yeah.
Okay, especially for people in my generation, it's helped us figure out how to maintain better romantic relationships. Something that I personally struggled with, which is that people have different ways of both expressing and receiving love. And for some people, there's words of affirmation, there's the giving of gifts, there's acts of service, there's physical touch, there's a few other ones. And what you really have to find is a partner that receives love in the same way you like to give it, and a partner that gives love in a way you like to receive it, which is to say, if you like to give gifts, but your partner prefers to receive words of affirmation, if your partner likes to give the gift of quality time, but you like to receive actual physical gifts, you're going to have trouble, because even though you love each other, you are not giving and receiving in the same love language. What does that have to do with anything? Well, a love language that I really appreciate is the caring that comes from building structures that can serve equitably. And in America, so when I first landed in Switzerland, when I first came to Switzerland, I was really stunned. I got the local currency and I was asking my Swiss friends, I said, who's this on your $5? Who's this on your 10? I guess Swiss franc. Who's this on the 20? And Lauren, to a person, nobody had any idea. I mean, these are people these are, accomplished professionals, elected officials that say, who's this on your 5 Swiss franc? And like, oh, I'm not sure. Now, in America, that would never happen. You could ask a third grader, who is this? And they say, it's Abraham Lincoln, that's Ben Franklin. In every community, there are statues to people, individuals that are our national heroes. And I would ask my Swiss friends, who are your national heroes? And they go, I don't, Roger Federer, Federer and William Tell. Those are the only two. I said, what about your president? And they're like, who's the president again? It was that's less salient to them. And so when I asked, where are your statues? And they said, what's the point of a statue? I said, it's to show what you're proud of, to show what you've accomplished, the things that you're proud of. And they'd say, oh, then I guess our statues are our trains and the tunnels that we carved through the mountains. And I said, well, your train is more than function. It's the way you demonstrate your pride and your ability to serve other people. And I find very endearing emphasis on punctuality, on showing up on time and being present in Switzerland is about that same thing. It's a love language that says, I care so much about you that I'm going to make sure the train arrives on time, and I'm going to make sure this meeting starts on time. That's a way of expressing my love to you. Now, a lot of Americans don't receive that as love. They receive it as, why are they scolding me for being 2 minutes late? Right? Because there's a difference in sending and receiving love. I think cities have got to do better about delivering infrastructure services, that is housing for the poor, vaccines for the vulnerable, it's the poor and the elderly, healthcare services, education, schools, and yes, trains and public transit, as a way of expressing their love and commitment for the people. Because what we've been doing instead is our politicians have spoke a love language of words of affirmation. President Trump was very good at this. He would come to a community and say, I see you, I care about you, I love you, and vote for me. Thank you, goodbye. And that feels really good in the moment, but after 4 years, if your life has not improved, then even those words start to fall flat. And that, I think, is part of what's built up this mistrust, is that the words of affirmation not come paired with other love languages. Is that clear enough, or was that too weird an answer? It's possible that was.
We're not going to go for a general survey, but to me it was clear enough. And I also got your message about the importance of time, and we already slightly overstretched our session now. And so I think I didn't take it personally, but it just reminded me, and it's so fascinating listening to you, Svante, but still I think you have now your whole workday ahead of you. And I want to be very respectful of the time you need to accomplish your important tasks. And so I really, really appreciated the time you spent with us virtually, but it was still time. I think very much value time for all the participants. And I think the type of questions we got, and also the involvement in the chat of several responsible people from different European cities, shows that there will be interest in these issues. I very, very much hope we will be able to talk about Switzerland once face-to-face in Switzerland, and we'll work on this. And having listened to you, I realized this was not just cheap talking about Alps and chocolate, but that there is also a substantial interest in two parts of the Swiss culture. And I really love to pursue this conversation at the next possible occasion. So thank you so much, Svante.
Thank you. Though the chocolate is very important as well. And I will put my Twitter handle in the chat, because I would love to continue this dialogue. And I do. I am still an hour away from my first meetings here on East Coast time. So I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for letting me join you, and I hope to meet you in person.